Welcome to the Copper State Marching Podcast, sponsored by the Arizona Marching Band Association, AZMBA. My name is Martin Hebda, the AZMBA Director of Education and Outreach.
And I'm Dan Hoffman, AZMBA Blueprint Advisor and Judge. The AZMBA Copper State Podcast was created to bring together the Arizona marching band community and to connect, educate, and entertain those involved in this wonderful activity.
Dan, it looks like you're not even home right now. Talk to us about where you are.
Well, I am in a hotel. It's, I think, haunted, but I'm in, more interestingly, Cupertino, California, in the heart of the Silicon Valley. I'm actually out here consulting Homestead High School. They have a Scholastic World percussion group heading to Dayton in a couple weeks, and I'm here to just add a little zhuzh to their production.
Well, that's exciting. And you're working with Ryan. So Ryan brought you out to work with Homestead?
Yeah, I think he's been there for about 15 years, and then something just happened this year. I brought him for the fall, and then the winter. It's really cool to be out here.
Well, I've been watching that program for many years, ever since Ryan started working there, and I've been a fan. And I've seen their show. I don't think I saw it live. I saw it on Flow, the drumline show, and it was pretty creative. It definitely seemed like a show that was very Ryan. And I remember hearing him talk about that show before. So it's a cool product. Do you feel like you guys made some progress?
That was a really cool thing because other than, Casa Grande 2020, that season got cut short, I've never worked with a Scholastic World ensemble. And so I was terrified coming in, with these kids in the Silicon Valley and their parents. Some of them, I think one of them invented iTunes or invented the iPhone. We're talking about people in, this is just La La Land. This is not Kansas anymore. So I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to reach these kids? How am I going to be useful for them? And what I've learned is that students really are pretty much the same everywhere, and that they are so open and loving, and that my information about wanting to be present and open, and the worthwhileness of communicating to the audience and enjoying your own production, apparently those lessons really are universal even at the top level. So I'm excited for what they can bring to Dayton for sure.
Well, that's great. That's great. And you're not going to be at Dayton, are you?
I don't think so. But there's a part of me that's like, after this weekend, I'm kind of like, oh, everything is so alive. I might have to figure out some things to make it, but probably not. We'll see.
It's hard. It's a commitment. It is a big commitment. So we're bringing Ryan back on the podcast today. What are some things that we have in store?
Well, I think we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of things because last time we had a really lovely philosophical discussion, but afterwards we decided that, we could use some more concrete information and concrete tools. So that's what this podcast today is going to be about.
That's good. It's going to be a great part two for us. And something new that we have, Copper State Marching Podcast has an email, so our listeners have the ability to reach out to us. We thought that'd be kind of a nice twist. And we have a future podcast coming up where we're going to be talking about student leadership. We'll talk about it again at the end of the podcast to remind you. But if you have specific questions that you may be interested in, feel free to email us at podcast@azmba.org. So before we bring Ryan back on, let's hear from our sponsors. AZMBA would like to thank our sponsors: Arizona Cardinals Football Club, The Band Shop, Bravgo Media, Encore Gifts, Forte Athletics, Instrumental Music Center, MacPack, Milano's Music, Music Celebrations International, Music for All, Pieces of Flair, Scoreboard Fundraising, Show Dots, Tide Dry Cleaners, and Yamaha. Thank you for supporting AZMBA. And welcome back, Ryan Springler. Before we jump into our topic today, Ryan, I know you've been busy. I know you've been traveling. You've been in Baltimore. You've been in California. Tell us a little bit about your travels.
I just got back from Northern California working with an indoor drumline with Dan Hoffman of this podcast of all people. This was at a program, Homestead High School, that I've been at for 15 years now, and very, very excitingly, we've been able to get Dan involved as a performance coach, working with developing the staff, and it's just been really great because anyone who knows Dan knows the value that he can bring to a program, and what's really, really cool is knowing the scope and the value of what he can bring, and then watching a room full of strangers gradually get awakened to it. Like watching a great teacher develop their first rapport with people is very fun. It's like watching the opening minutes of Mary Poppins, being like, they have no idea they're going to be dancing with penguins, but they will. Indeed, they will.
And indeed, they did. Thank you, Ryan. That's so sweet. And it's so fun to work with your students. Thank you for bringing me in. Well, I guess to the conversation now. Let me ask, when building a marching band show from scratch, what's your process for selecting the concept, the music, and the overall theme?
So, great question, fraught question, because it has so many layers to it. But if we were designing something from scratch, which for the audience, which would be, we're not selecting any prearranged music, and we're sort of building everything from the ground up, you'd start by selecting the concept. And the first question that I would have would be, is the concept relevant to the performers and the audience? And narrowing that down, in 2026 and beyond, a concept can be about any noun, basically any person, place, thing, feeling, concept. It can really be about any verb, any sort of action too. As long, and when I talk about that word relevancy, it's a question of, can you take the length of what you want your show to be, which is, for most groups between 6 and like 8, 9 minutes, and for that length of time, can you examine that idea, that word, or tell a story about it in a compelling way through the entire length of time of your performance? Is there enough to say that's interesting and compelling from minute 1 to minute 8 about this idea? And the idea could be the French Revolution, it could be Russian composers. So the concept can really come from anywhere, as long as it's something that's got aspects and attributes about it that you can build a shape over time. And I'm probably going to do that roller coaster hand that I just did to kind of like represent the flow of the show at least 50 times on this podcast, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to build this shape through time with high points and low points to be able to achieve, successfully fulfill a lot of the criteria on the judging sheets of the circuits that we compete in. And a lot of the words that they talk about are like variety and continuity. And so this implies that we should have a journey through time that's got varied peaks, high points, and low points, but there's also connective tissue between these things that makes it feel cohesive and all of one piece. So your idea, it's like your idea can be anything, but there are some minimal criteria of coherency that the idea should have. It's also key too that whatever story it is that you want to tell, whatever idea you want to explore, it's something that seems like it would make sense if it were translated into the language of pageantry, which is to say that it's a group of high school students that are like 900 feet away from you on a football field, marching around and doing different formations and then playing their instruments. And is there a way that you can use the medium of marching band, which is what we're talking about right now? We'll just keep it simple to only the marching band side of pageantry. Is there a way within that medium of moving around on the field decently far away from the audience, outdoors in uncontrolled lighting, that can tell this story in an intelligible way? So if you've got an idea that seems like it's going to be relevant to the audience, and it feels like there are aspects of this thing that can translate into the language of marching band effectively, then it's a fertile idea. It's something that we should explore further. And then at that point, it's a matter of just choosing what music you would like to illustrate all these highs and lows of that journey with through time.
You just said so many great things, and I know we're definitely going to dig into all of them. I want to make sure we don't evolve into a philosophical conversation again, but I want to
Sure.
highlight, or I want to underscore one thing that you seem to emphasize, which is choosing the concept before the music. And I get the vibe that a lot of people, it's the music that inspires them to make a show. Why would you suggest a concept before music?
I think there are a lot of valid answers to that question. And to me, one of them is just that in 2026 in particular, we've become such a visual primary culture. The importance of the written word, it continues to recede on a year by year basis. And doing things with a multimedia, visual, multi-layered component, that's the world that we live in. And if we're talking about relevancy, that's the world that our audiences, our judges, our students, our families, the community of your band program, everyone sort of exists in a world where we're used to being bombarded with multiple streams of sensory input at once. And to that degree, I like thinking about the concept first, because then you're thinking about, what's the seed crystal that's going to generate visual ideas, character ideas, musical ideas, costuming ideas, color palettes all at once. Your urge to select a concept can be generated from an individual piece of music. You might be like, man, I love Ravel's Bolero, and I think it would be great if a marching band played it once or twice. I've never heard of it, so let's do Ravel's Bolero, and then you can go on from there and then attach a concept to that. But ultimately, when you're thinking about the concept layer, that's when you're starting to first kind of be a coordinator, in the sense that you're having to think about visual and music and these other things all at the same time. The simultaneity of this, which I think is a key idea that we'll return to multiple times.
And I think a long time ago, I'm dating myself, but back in the 90s, heck, I marched my first marching band show in the 80s. But like
Hmm.
there would be, I like this song, I like this song, I like this song, let's put it all together. And I don't even know if like some of my high school shows had a title, like a theme. It was just, here's our show. And I think we got to the point where we saw musicals, and that was the first time we started seeing kind of concepts and things pulled together. But now, I mean, we are way deep into what you're describing, I think. Which I think gives us a better product, especially if the design team has someone like you, which is somewhat of a music encyclopedia. Time and time again, we'll have a concept, and I can be like, I am stumped on what tunes, and you just rattle off three different tunes, and I'm just typing it down because I want to research what those sound like, because you just are able to, like, you'll hear music and then you get a vision. How does that work? And maybe that's going a little too deep, but there's a lot of times that you'll hear some music and you already have a vision of what you want to see on the field.
That one's really tough, man. If I could unweave that rainbow, I would probably be making more money than I am right now. But it's always just been an automatic reflex. Ever since I've been little, listening to music, it was moving around in my head in some sort of abstract way. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that it's a form of like synesthesia, but I remember even as a little kid, like listening to the classical music records that my grandma or my parents would put on and be like, that's a purple piece, that's a green piece, this one is yellow, and it flashes and gets closer to you at this part, and then it kind of recedes away. And I had this very sort of like abstract internal monologue that would happen inside my head listening to any music, pop music or anything. And I would also be aware of, how my heart rate changed and stuff like that, feeling my own physical intensity modulate with this beautiful music I was listening to. And so I always had a sense that it was like, the music itself isn't just sounding a certain way, it's implying something else. And I think that that's the key thing about coordinating. It's listening to something or thinking about an idea and basically being able to say, like, okay, what attaches to this idea in other dimensions? What does the color red sound like? Or from the other side of it, what color does would this piece of music look like? And starting from that and as you can tell with these questions, if you're listening out there and you're like, well, how do you figure out how to do that with there being any sort of right answers? There are no right answers. There's just your individual taste level. Kind of like how everyone knows what a hamburger is, but there is no one definitive recipe for a hamburger. There's a cluster of ingredients and characteristics that are representative of most hamburgers, but then there's this like cloud of ingredients that attenuate out around the hamburger idea, that, depending on what kind of cook you are, you can mix these things in. And people would still be like, oh yeah, that tastes good. Or, you know what? I don't actually think bananas should go on this. So it really just comes down to not being afraid to, so to speak, taste what you cook, and try to be a fan of what you're doing, and be like, okay, that was boring when we did that. Okay, that was really difficult when we tried that. And, giving yourself permission to, over the course of multiple years, get better at the process of putting these ingredients together.
Ryan, you as the coordinator, and I've seen this firsthand in not just designing of my shows, but in projects that we work together outside of in Casa Grande. You are very good at a word pivot. You can be in a meeting and the director could just be like, I don't feel like this, and immediately you'll be right off and like, well, we could do this or this. And your ability to find another way when like someone it's just really impressive to me.
Thank you. You know, on the last half of the podcast when we were talking about this, where we were a lot more philosophical and big picture about this, we spent a lot of time talking about how important the relationships were between the people on the design team and the understanding the context of the program. You know, what do these people like to do? What do these kids like to do? What kind of lifestyle do the kids have? You know, working for places all around the country, I can tell you that it's like, if you're working for a school in San Diego where the kids have access to shopping malls and the beach, it's different than the kids that are in a different socioeconomic slice that go camping in the mountains and are outdoorsy and get scrapes and aren't afraid to be athletic and get dirty at the end of a rehearsal. You know, it's like there's all these elements that sort of like combine into the like terroir of each program, where every program has their own individual taste. And you know, building that trust, building that understanding of who you're talking to, what the program is like, that's part of being able to make these choices that come together that are exciting for people, that people find delicious and worthwhile and worth rehearsing on.
So kind of like what I'm gathering from all of this is that for those who are inclined to design a show starting from a piece of music, that you can do that, but it's being careful to not design a soundtrack, but to design a movie. And it sounds like you are discussing not only what are we seeing as we hear it, but there's also just so many other variables of the culture and of the people that can add into like the feeling and the environment of that movie. Now, I think pivoting from there, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you might translate a musical score into a visual plan that works for the field.
Step one is to you know, you can do it with the recording, but it's most easy to do if you have the recording and a score in front of you, because the score already naturally, you know, being a visual document of what's happening in the music, already starts you thinking visual and music at the same time, because as you're listening to the music and following through, you're seeing literally these contrasting blocks of ink and you know, it's like one of the things that I almost do is, it's like as I'm looking through the score, I almost like watch it with my eyes unfocused, like it's a magic eye, and you're trying to like look through the paper, and it's like, okay, so from letter A to letter B, that's 48 counts of tutti, because I've defocused my eyes and I can see that most of the orchestra is playing the whole time. So that feels like this whole block of music is, you know, it's like this is a thick block of music where it doesn't change its shape from the beginning to the end. Oh, and then from letter B to letter C, it starts to dwindle down. And so it moves from being a block to being a wedge. It becomes very thin and attenuated. Then from letter C to letter D, it's like Morse code, where it stops being continuous and it starts being pointillistic. And then a huge block of 2D material comes in at letter D. I don't know what piece of music I'm describing. A lot of music has this sort of visual element to it already, very obviously in the score, where you can see what are the major formal divisions, where does the texture change in the music, you know, what segments of the music feel like they're related to one another, and then what elements are intended to bring in contrast. The key thing I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about designing a show is this controlling metaphor of designing a journey through time, and and thinking about the form of things. So like, yeah, exactly. That it's almost like we're building a house with these rooms of different sizes and then passageways that connect them. And so and this guided tour through this building you create is the audience's experience of the show through time. And so you know, it's like the more effective you are in looking at the score and being able to figure out, okay, well, how big is the living room of this piece? What is the, you know, if I walk into the room and that's the introductory segment of the piece, the first thing I see, is it a big room? Does the introduction to this piece last a really long time? Or is it relatively short before it digresses into a second idea? Does that feel like a new formal division? Basically, the more, you know, for all of you score analysis peeps out there, you're going to be really excited about that. But I really do feel like step one is just understanding the music from a formal standpoint. What are the main divisions of the piece? And then from there, you can start to figure out things like, which ones are repetitive so that we can cut the first one or the second one, which one of these moments might be a little bit prolonged, which one of these moments might have technical challenges or a harmonic digression that would be inappropriate for the performance level of the students, or which one of these moments, it's like, especially with some of the creative stuff we've talked about, which one of these moments feels a little threadbare, so we've decided we're going to weave in the melody of the ballad and over the top of what otherwise would just be like a bland accompaniment texture. Kind of all of those things are downwind of understanding the form of what you're working on. So that's thing number one, the score analysis, and being able to sort of like rattle down. It's like, okay, this piece does A, and then it does B, then it does A again for the full ensemble, and then it does a long transition, and then there are elements of B as we move into C. Whatever the case is, understanding the roadmap is going to let you start to eventually attach visual and programmatic ideas to it via a count sheet. But it all comes down to really just knowing what the piece of music does through time and how it's organized through time.
In a real quick piece, when you're talking about that score, could only imagine you working with the same arranger many years. It just gets more seamless and seamless. I think about our journey and how a lot of times as I'm writing out the music for my shows, I am looking at it and writing it in your lens, thinking about do we have just Tootie the entire time? Do I have a place so there can be interest? Am I thinking about is there if we need to have a prop reset? Do I have sections of people that can be free to do those sort of things? So I think definitely working with you has helped me grow a lot as an arranger in things that I'm doing as well.
Totally. And well, and it all of these things are feedback loops that just accelerate over time as we build more trust and context and trust and context, where you're not just writing through my lens, but some of the initial selections I'm thinking about through your lens. Like, is this a piece of music that Martin will have fun arranging? Does this sound like other things that we've done well? And are there references where I can be like, ooh, we need to do a Bermuda Triangle thing here, referencing back to our Bermuda Triangle show from a couple years ago, or, oh, remember how you did this one thing? And we didn't like it. Oh, let's try it this way this year. Do you think you would like it that time? It's what's really cool about that is even things that we, would consider like were speed bumps of previous years can sometimes come back and be guardian angels of future shows because we're just open to learning lessons from them. But it's all about learning the people around you and learning how they read between your lines and how you can read between theirs.
And I am sure that you guys working together for all these years, you're every single year you're trying to get better and better and better. And so I think that maybe that alone can provide some relief to those listening that, you know, optimizing your program coordination design process doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect. It's just giving you a system and a rubric and some sort of guide through line through the season, but that can always be bettered and bettered and better. So that way we're growing as well as the students. So no pressure to get it right the first time. And in fact, it sounds like what's more important is finding the right people and the right chemistry where you can have the conversations of what works, what doesn't work, and the willingness to try it again next year. And with time, it's not just hiring those big names and paying tons of money as much as like finding people who are passionate about you and in your program and willing to get it wrong sometimes with them, knowing that over time you can get better and better.
Ryan, a couple years ago, we were deep into a design process on a show, and it just wasn't sitting right with me. And I'm like, we need to go a different direction. And it was late. It was probably February, and we were like, okay, let's go with this other route. It ended up being a great show, but we had to pivot. And it wasn't like one of us didn't like it. It was going to be a really cool show, but there's just something that wasn't sitting right. So the pivoting is important.
It very much is. And the what I would say to everyone out there, the earlier you are in the process, the more you should be okay with deleting everything and going back to the blank page, or better yet, leaving everything as notes for a later year and then moving to a new page in the document. Because there's really, it's like, ask me again if it's August 21st and you haven't picked the opener yet. But there is no wasted time spent designing, especially if you're invested in the team, because the ideas you talk about that are blind alleys or worthwhile, even if you discuss something and you end up all hating it, you've really honed in on what you don't want to do. And it may sound like that's ridiculous and a waste of time, but a big problem with a lot of groups is they don't even know what they don't like. And so they go out there feeling like they need to be the world's best UIL ensemble, be the world's best BOA ensemble. Oh, this year we're going to BOA. We need to do what the BOA judges want. No, you need to do what you want because you're the person who's going to be locked into this roller coaster for a year. And if you like it, the chances are way higher that someone else is going to see that there was a spark when you were putting it together. It's like you can always tell when you're watching a show if the design team was smiling at each other when they were talking, or if it was a series of emails and paychecks exchanged and it just sort of gets out there.
I think speaking of sort of like perhaps the boringness or like just the lack of the lack of resonating with the design team, the students, the audience. You mentioned earlier the idea of like looking at the score and noticing, if something is too long or too repetitive. And I think that's alluding to this concept of pacing. And I think maybe that's something we quickly discuss before we start to talk about count sheets.
God, you guys are pitching me these really really deep topics. I would say the the easiest way to wrangle pacing in my mind is just the conception of relative to the amount of time you're spending in a different in a given formal division of the show, like in this impact or in this transition or in this flute solo, like relative to the amount of time that it lasts, are you generating enough content and information and sensory data for the audience to make it worthwhile? Like, is the juice over time worth the squeeze that you're squeezing over time? And then, and when we talk about there being pacing errors in pageantry, we're talking about a mismatch in that regard. This moment is too long with too little happening. This moment is too short for how dense it is, so my eyes and ear can't follow it. When we're thinking about pacing errors, the issue is really just sort of like, a dilution problem. Is the formula of content, the bottle of content and the bottle of time, have we mixed them evenly enough for this given moment? And the worst part is it's not a concrete mixture. Like some moments do need to be dense and they do need to make you feel a little what's going on. And then some moments do need to feel actively like you're down regulating the audience's heartbeat, breath rate, overall level of energy in the nervous system. You're down regulating the audience and calming them down and saying, okay, now you can be receptive to something new in a different way. So to me, that's what pacing is. It's controlling the rate of information flow through time effectively.
And so, in terms of you said giving the instructions, giving the prompts, is that something you do through a count sheet? And is this the moment that we actually define what a count sheet is and talk about how it's utilized?
God, I suppose we should. So, a count sheet. On the last half of this discussion, we talked about all of these big picture, sort of like right-brained concepts of like, well, what does it feel like? But the key deliverable that a program coordinator can bring a program is basically the count sheet, which is more or less a Google document, and it can happen in any forms, but it needs to be some sort of abstracted document that's able to encode the information that you've discovered in the score, these formal divisions, the parts that you like, the parts that you want to remove, the things you want to emphasize. It's a way of encoding it into a really thin, easy to perceive layer of verbal information. So you're not expecting the music arranger to go through the score and start with it at step one like you did. You're trying to provide them an interpretive lens through the count sheet, through time, from letter A to letter B. I love all of this, but I feel like it should be a full brass line moment so we can have all the woodwinds moving props. So that's what I want you to do here. From B to C, I feel like this is too long. Let's make it a percussion and sound design driven transition, and let's make it only last like 20 seconds. If you have to, make it last 30. It's a way of being able to talk about these things through time. And then to be able to stack on top of that the layer of visual information, conceptual information, color guard equipment information. Maybe a good metaphor is for any of you out there that have used a DAW, a music editing program, like oh God, all of the Pro Tools maybe. I'm thinking about the idea of how you have an individual audio track that travels horizontally from the beginning and the end to the music piece, and then you've got parallel tracks of differing information that all line up together, and they produce the totality of what you're perceiving. And anything that happens horizontally through time is sequential, and then anything that's lined up vertically is something that's all happening at the same time. We're playing this music while this visual idea is happening, while the color guard is spinning this implement and not that implement. That's really the coordinative process in a nutshell. It's figuring out what things happen in differing arrangements through time with each other, whether that's simultaneous or sequential or whatever the case might be, anything in between.
So it sounds like a spreadsheet, perhaps, that you're formatting. And if so, what does it look like?
This is where if you're not a Google Drive head already, I would recommend that we all jump in there, because being able to use Google Sheets in particular, basically Excel, but what you're creating in the column grid is you're creating a sense of like, okay, here's the timeline of the show on one dimension, and then you're creating separate tracks in each of these separate columns where it's like, here's the column where I'm going to describe to the music arranger what they need to do to the music. And then next to that is the column of, okay, here's the overall general effect idea I want everyone to be thinking about in this given moment. So that means drill wise, we're going to be doing this here. And then this is going to be traveling. So you need to be moving around on the field. And this moment needs to be a halt for the woodwinds because it's a woodwind feature. It's like basically taking every single individual member of the productive design team, the people that are generating product for other people to learn, and then giving them their marching orders through time. In this opening minute of the show, for it to fulfill our vision, we need the music arranger to do this, the drill writer to do this, the choreographers to do that, and the costumes need to be of this certain quality. And so using this Excel spreadsheet, stretching out the windows and stuff like that, you can kind of format it and divide it however you want. It doesn't even really need to be the captions. It's like if it's a team that knows each other, there could be like a Martin column and then a Ryan column and then a Dan column just of what our action items are. Because as well we know, not every team has a drum corps design team where you've got a sound designer and a battery writer and a front ensemble writer and a brass arranger and then a music coordinator on top of that. A lot of people are wearing stacks of hats. So you divide up the count sheet how it makes sense best for your team, not necessarily for some ideal, I suppose.
And is that often a sheet that's done by you and everyone looks at it, or is it more like you and the caption heads kind of work together? Or do you start it and say, I need feedback? How does that usually?
All of the above, and it often changes from stage to stage in the process. Like I think about how like an embryo develops from a single cell, which is like your first idea. That's just like, okay, we want the show to be called Red. And then it grows and starts to develop internal divisions and complexity from there and gradually get larger. I feel like early on the count sheet is almost entirely me, and the count sheet is really just sort of for driving the first design meeting. Like for example, a couple years ago, I was doing a show about Carmen Sandiego, or a woman in a red hat named Carmen, because that's legally distinct from the Carmen Sandiego copyright. In any case, when I was writing this first document, my count sheet was a column that was basically just like a box for each movement of the show. Like, oh, we really like this trombone piece for wind ensemble, Red Sky by Anthony Barfield. And so for the entire opener, there was just one box that was like, we want to use Red Sky. And then drill wise, we were like, okay, we know this is the opener. So it's going to be a fast, exciting, drill heavy movement. And there's just like one box for each caption. Color guard, you're going to be in multiple lines, flag and weapon, and you're going to be integrated into the drill as we tell this story of Carmen Sandiego, excuse me, not San Diego, traveling around the world. And so it's like I would write out this whole document that would be like movement, 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 plot point, plot point, plot point, and fill it in fully. But then, once the music arranger would go in and be like, all right, I've taken Red Sky and here's my arrangement of it based on your pacing, then we would expand and divide that out like that embryo that's gradually getting bigger with more internal complexity. And then it would be like, okay, the single box that was Red Sky, that was just Ryan saying, hey, we like this piece, we want to use it, has now become a count sheet where it's like, okay, this opening section from top to letter A is 16 counts. This is what we do here. A to B is 48 counts, and this is what we do there. And then that's where it starts to be a lot more open. And I'll put in some notes to kind of, in a secretarial way, be like, all right, here are the big tent poles of what we've talked about verbally so far. But I try to leave a lot of negative space in the count sheet now, especially because so much of everyone being able to be creatively fulfilled on the project is not just them following your instructions, it's them being able to have their own fun with it and put their own spin on it and work productively inside the framework that you've created. So the further we get from the first initial abstract idea to the much more complicated layers of concrete information that are building up, I try to make sure that my interventions are less and less over time and more targeted. Where it might feel like at design meeting number one, it's like, all right, Ryan pitched us the show, but then by design meeting number three or number four, we're all dialoguing back and forth about how we like the first draft of the opener. And that takes a ton of feedback from all corners pouring into the count sheet and seasoning it with all of this extra information and dimension that you only get from collaborating with other people.
Do you often speak to the different caption heads yourself, or do they usually go through the band director to you?
I find that the more familiar I am with the program, the more I kind of like to do back channeling, where we'll have meetings where everyone's in together and we'll kind of like start the pottery wheel going really slowly. But Martin, you know me, I'm a firm believer that it's like you should have the smallest number of people in any meeting that you can possibly get away with. It's like, between two people there's one connection, between three people there's three connections, between four people every single brain that you add to the conversation offers more of these like cat's cradle sort of like ways that we can misinterpret each other and put friction into the process. So as the process starts to get more and more complicated, I try and do more and more back channeling where it's like, all right, we had a great meeting talking about that opener, now I'm going to sit down with just the guard person and talk with him or her about what they would like to do at this given moment, so we can both sort of like geek out and be really specific about the vocab, the jargon, the priorities, the educational journey that just that one caption is on. So it's sort of like I try to have like pullouts and I weave myself around. I mean, everything is RuPaul's Drag Race to me, but I think about the segment in the middle of every episode where everyone's working on what the challenge of the episode is going to be, and RuPaul comes in and then goes from station to station like, what are you going to do for the runway, what are you going to do for the runway, talk to me about what your challenges and what your excitements are going to be. Moving to the next person, what's your plan for the runway this week? I kind of feel like I'm RuPaul in that moment.
Well, yes. Uh, I just love all these analogies you're making of like the weaving, the untangling, the sort of division. Like this, I'm imagining almost like that process of mitosis and the cells getting smaller but more, and we're taking these big clumps of clay and we are making them more and more manageable. And as more cells are in the process, as the pixelation becomes less granular and more high definition, that's when more people can come in to refine those details. Really quickly, I want to kind of maybe using that Morgan Escondido show, if you will. You talked about how the first movement, you started with just that piece of music and that divided from there. Sometimes I feel like there's a pitfall of like a group has like a really strong opener, like first minute, and then it just doesn't really, it kind of fizzles out by the end. Do you have any advice for like that sort of cellular dividing process for the entire show structure?
Yeah, God, if there was a bulletproof way to make sure that every idea was as good as your best idea, then I might have a couple more medals. But the truth is the thing that comes closest to being a vaccine for that is to never get stuck in one area of the canvas for too long. I love to paint. I'm a landscape painter, and what you're always trying to do is establish the global relationship of lights and darks. Where's the horizon line? What color is the sky? Is it brighter or darker than the ground plane? And then to work through the whole canvas and to try to keep the whole thing at roughly the same level of detail. And I feel like often, anytime I've done a show that feels lopsided, it's because we got stuck on the tree in the foreground. We started loving that one percussion break, and we really made that one percussion break really, really cool. But the problem is, as in painting, if you're not always looking at the big picture and always putting everything in relationship to everything else, and you get overly detailed in one point, it's like you can very easily make huge proportion errors. I think about, like, if you've ever been to like an eighth grade art class, you see the kids are really focused on putting a lot of detail into facial portraits, and so like the eyes all have all these individual eyelashes and the lips are really crinkly. You can see every fold in the lips drawn, but like the lips are too big and the eyes are not level. And it's like the kids jumped into rendering the details before just sitting back and being like, all right, does this all fit this cross plane? Like, are the eyes level on the skull? Did I stop to check if the eyes were the same size before I started choosing what color the iris was? That's where I think those problems come from, not respecting the overall composition. Like, don't get stuck on the opener just because that's the piece of music you like, and don't get stuck on the ballad because you're really excited about this one color guard moment. Don't get stuck on the percussion break. Always reflect on what's the percussion break going to sound like after the ballad. What's this drill move going to look like after we've been running around for 7 minutes already? Will it look as clean as it does during visual block when the children are all fatigued? All It's that word context again, just trying to continually contextualize everything so that you're not that eighth grade art class kid drawing the world's like most detailed eye a little too far away from the nose.
And when you talk about the budgeting, I know that there have been several years where we've had a lot of props, shall we say, that you've been really good with saying this is kind of the minimum of what we would need for this show to work. And then the next layer is if we can make this happen, this could make it really cool. And then, oh, if we have bam, this is like everything that we could possibly put in there. Having those three different tiers has been really helpful for the director because we know, okay, we need to at least do this. And usually, I mean, it's rare that we get to where we just get everything out there, but we're usually able to get past that minimum piece to try and make the show as effective as possible. But I think you do a really good job of putting those together.
Thank you. And for all the staff members and directors that are listening to this, it's very difficult to negotiate downward from the bare minimum. So it's worthwhile exploring, like, what is the, Charles Dickens, like, impoverished British child version of the show. Please, sir, can I have one sound sample versus the like incredible BOA national finalist $250,000 printed FJM top version of the idea? You have to start somewhere, and it's like, if every single thing you do in the ideation phase, the creative phase, is about trying to come up with the grayest, simplest, most achievable version, you're really kind of smothering the spark of the show before it has a chance to come to life. Like, having some aspirational things, even if they're intended for you to walk back from, is good. It's like when you see the concept art for all the Disney Pixar movies. They look beautiful, but some of the concept art is even more beautiful and stylized and outlandish, and you're aware that it's like they had to start with these very striking images to be able to water them down into something that's more palatable for a global audience, to like shave the weird parts off of it, use less chili oil, like, just gray everything out. But you can't do that when you start from gray.
Yeah, and what I like about what you're saying is that sometimes I think I've programs will pigeonhole themselves into trying to execute a certain idea that they didn't really consider what would need to happen, what resources would need to be available, how much will this cost if we need extra props to illustrate this idea. And so unfortunately they get to a point in the season where it's kind of like the show just doesn't read, it doesn't make sense. But at least it started from a place of intrigue. But it sounds like what you're saying too is that maybe that idea doesn't work. And maybe that if it's scaled down too much, it just becomes bland or unreadable. But I really do think that there's any show that every group can find a show that works within their environmental resources, and it might take the second or third idea that you come up with to find one that matches you, but being more able to pivot again away from a show that's just more than what we can handle or more than what we can realistically afford. But that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice inspiration, intrigue, and excitement in the show itself.
No, and as I go through this more and more, I realize that the ideas are cheap. The ideas will always come. There's always going to be another piece of music. There's always going to be another color palette. You know, the inspiration itself, coming up with a new layer of that is always going to be so much easier in the Januaries and Februaries and Marches of the world than it is to accept something that kind of gives you a red flag feeling in your gut and then be watching it like from the top of the U of A stadium thinking like, yep, uh-huh. Yeah, I guess so, huh? So trust your gut, trust the red flags, trust that the ideas are cheap and you can have another one. And it's way easier to have a different idea in April than it is to change the music after the kids have memorized it in September.
So does that rehearsal planning, does that have a role within the show design as you're working?
Totally. On the last or the other half of this conversation, we talked about how the program coordinator, their job isn't just to come up with a good show, it's to grow the staff and develop the program through time. And I think that this is where we start to see hints of that, where the count sheet and the show idea that's all about what we're doing in 2026, there's an element of thinking about this context that we've been talking about. What are the resources and logistics and rehearsal things and dependent trees of skills that we need? This is where you start to connect 2026 to what happened in 25 and 24 and what will eventually happen in 27 and 28, where, you know, if we're thinking about, oh, we're going to play this really luscious ballad that's by Imogen Heap, and it's got all of this beautiful harmony in it. But we know that to really tune it correctly, like we did in a year before, it's going to need this much time to go through with a harmony director and tune each of these chords with the full wind ensemble. You know, it's like thinking through what you've had to do in the past to achieve a certain moment allows you to kind of budget for that better. And it also starts prepping you for like, oh, it actually turns out that as we've fed a couple years of freshmen through this process, they grow up to be better seniors that get it faster, that teach the freshmen to ride the tide a little bit quicker. I mean, we saw that with body movement. I want to say in 2009, 2008, when Casagrande really first started deprioritizing mere athletic drill and adding dance and characterization to what we were doing, it felt like it was pulling teeth. So when we were talking about adding body to the show, we were talking about it in terms of like, all right, here are these like four key moments where we need to do a little body thing, and that'll be the coolest thing we do. And you see that in drum corps too, like in the 2000s, like some of those Cavaliers things are like Cavies 2000, the dance moment is very memorable because that's about as much logistical leeway that group had to learn clean dance that year in the 2000s. But now, because we've taken so many iterations of freshman to senior to freshman to senior to freshman to senior since 2008, it's part of our context, and learning dance is expected from everyone, and there are already a bunch of kids in the program that are good at it and are demonstrating how to be good at it, so the freshmen want to impress those people and socially blend into what they're doing. So we know that it's like, oh, you can actually put dance everywhere on the show because in some respects it's easier to teach now. And so that's, you know, being aware of how we teach it, how it's rehearsed, how quickly the kids move through that material, that allows you to start making judgment calls about how much can we use that, you know, how big can this slice of the pie chart be? Do we want the show to be mostly halted with body? Do we want it to be more, you know, like athletic drill? Those sort of things you can start to figure out when you're just sensitive to how the group learns, how they've learned over time, what you're getting better and worse at over time. It's key to think about all of those things because nothing comes for free. Everything has to happen on purpose.
And speaking of purpose, this it could be for Ryan, but I think also for even Martin, especially thinking about Ryan, it's almost like you're budgeting the skills, or you're using what we know in the past to extrapolate how much time things will take presently. I'm wondering if either of you can talk about sort of like maybe adding checkpoints in the season. So it's not just the program coordination of the show, but also like, okay, by this date, we want this part of the show learned, or we need these skills learned by this date. Can you give any insight into that?
I can go on that if you want, Ryan.
Do.
Yeah, I do a similar thing like Ryan does when he talks about a Google Sheets. I have an Excel file that just has a calendar and it's already created. And the first thing I need to do is I'm like, when are our football games? When are our open dates for competitions? Okay, that being said, when's our Saturday camps going to be? When is band camp? All right, when do we want to have the show done by? How do we have to split it up each movement to get just the drill to me to then when do we want to have a camp to learn it to then do we want to clean it. So I have a calendar that we put all of that in.
And in the other half of the podcast, we talked about the idea that it's like the relationship between the program coordinator and the band director. The band directors are very detail oriented, and they feel the most comfortable when they're really aware of the details of what's going on. You know, there's so many plates a band director has to span, and I feel like interfacing about the calendar is a great way to build that trust and validate the trust that a director has in the program coordinator by being able to be like, hey, I didn't just say that the show's going to be about an asteroid hitting the earth and killing the dinosaurs. Cool, that's our concept. We've set, and now you feel out of control, like, all right, we're just living in Ryan's vision. It, it gives the director agency and control to be like, I want to do the opener and the ballad. I want to go all the way up to the asteroid impact by the first football game. And the program coordinator being able to say, like, great, we'll make sure that we get the dinosaur costumes ready for that. The asteroid prop's going to need to be ready for that. You know, I have no idea why that's the show I chose to illustrate this, but it's like it helps everything feel a lot more achievable, breaking it down into these bites that are much more mentally chewable. Okay, you know, we're all we need to do is just get the first 60 seconds on and make sure that we can do it without a metronome by August 20th. All of a sudden, that feels a lot more achievable than, you know, the entire staging of the Ten Commandments.
So I wanted to ask this question here. So for aspiring program coordinators, and I think we may have touched a little bit about this on the previous podcast, but what skills, whether it be musical or organizational or visual, do you think are most important for them to develop to be good at a position like you have?
Ooh, you know, on the last call I was talking about how like artistically you need to be an omnivore, just be interested in everything, and that's really open ended. Let's be a little bit more specific. Within the domain of pageantry, you need to be interested in every caption. It's very difficult for a design team to work with just a color guard person and watch them struggle with talking about musical aspects. It's very difficult for a design team to work with just a percussion person who doesn't really care about the winds. It's very, you know, and this goes for any of them, just a drill jockey who doesn't care about what the kids sound like when you're making them run around. It's like the better the team is, the more you'll find people with multiple caption experience and multiple caption interest. And it's especially key for the program coordinator to be a fan of the art of percussion, the art of sound design, the art of color guard, the art of drill design, the art of arrangement, so that number one, so that you can be fully aware of what that professional's vocabulary and jargon is like, and you can speak their language, and so that you can be familiar with what the range of choices actually is. If I wasn't a fan of color guard and all I knew about the color guard was just what I saw out of the corner of my eyes while I was watching cool drill in drum corps videos as a teenager, I went through that phase as every drill writer does. It's like eventually you have to start watching where the battery is placed. You have to start watching what the spatial spreads are like. How is it that the Blue Devils were able to play that moment in time? Oh, they put the battery over there. Oh, there was a sight line through the drill to this drum major. Oh, these people backfield have a conductor in the corner. Do we have enough conductors to put a conductor in the corner? All of those things, if you're not a fan of every layer of the activity, you can't be sensitive to them. And so it's like you find yourself either not being able to make those choices because you don't know they're available, or you find worse, you laboriously reinvent the wheel when you could have just learned from some of the great people that have done this already. So I think it's key to be interested in every column of the spreadsheet, so to speak, every column of the count sheet. You need to care about that, and not just be team wind section, team brass. You kind of have to, whatever you came from, whatever your caption background was as a performer, you kind of have to kill that and start being interested in what the whole thing looks like from 900 feet away at the top of the stadium.
Before we finish this up, Brian, there are two things that I remember in our conversations that I bring up to my band every year, probably. One of them I bring up several times. One of them is you were with us for one of our rehearsals or a camp, and we were talking about doing a section of the show, and you were talking about the red card and the green card. Do you remember kind of what that was? Can you explain that to our listeners? Because I think this is a very important, an important way to approach our craft.
Totally. So we all know that pageantry is a game of muscle memory. Ideally, in a given performance, very little is left to chance, and ideally, nothing is left to chance. Our dream is that we can rehearse the band until there's a certain predictable output that happens, and then we just press the button, and that predictable output happens at a adjudicated performance, and then we get credited fully for it. And we know that the only way to really achieve that is via increasing the muscle memory of the band. And so to that degree, if muscles were smart, we would just call it memory. But they can't really do any thinking on their own, and it's all very habitual. So what that means is it's like in rehearsal, your body is remembering every single rep that you do inside your body, physically. Your brain can differentiate between, oh, that was a good rep because Mr. Hebda said it was good, and that was a bad rep because Mr. Hebda said it was bad. But your nervous system, your muscles, your endocrine system, your respiratory system, they're all just treating every rep as like, all right, there's another one in the pile. There's another one in the pile. And whether it's a good rep, a green card, or a bad rep, a red card, or maybe something in the middle, a yellow card, it's like you just sort of create this deck of cards and then you shuffle it. And on a given performance day, when you ask the 15-year-olds, all right, go out there, do this for strangers, a big stadium, right? It's basically what happens is the kids all close their eyes and they draw a card out of the deck. And what you're trying to do is play this numbers game of just drastically getting the green cards, the number of good, focused, embodied, present reps to dramatically outnumber the red cards. Such that at any given segment of the show, more kids are having a green card rep than a red card rep. Because if an intangible number of the kids in a given moment are doing what they're supposed to, it's going to pull those glitches back into it. All of us have done marching band. We all know what it feels like to be a step or two out of the cover down for the first time and just being like, why am I not in the drill here? And then you just jump back in. That's only possible when the drill is clean to see that you're out of it in the first place. So making sure that the largest number of people are doing the right thing isn't just going to make those people, it's not just more people doing a good thing, it's that the correction field that's being enforced over the whole band is stronger, and we're able to pull more people back into their right places in time, in tone, in tune, in the drill, when everyone around them is having a great rep. And so it's just key that we're always trying to maximize the number of effective of reps and minimize the number of poor reps when we're rehearsing them. And not for nothing, folks, you can cut a bad rep. A great way to keep the red card from being put into the pile is just physically stopping the memory forming process. Nope, cut, reset. So easy to do that. And obviously, rehearsals become dentistry. They become miserable if you do that more than once. But that's a very key skill to be able to remind everyone. It's just like, hey, this is not at a working level right now. I'm not going to let your nervous system encode that into the realm of possible responses to a performance situation. We're going to stop. We're going to reset our brains, and we're going to approach this with more presence so that we have our average level of rep achievement stays high. We're still putting green cards in.
You explain that much better than I do. So maybe
Oh.
I'll just do a nice recording of this for everybody to listen to. Here's the second one that I say a lot, and you probably don't remember this because this was probably 2010, 2011. It was a long time ago. And we were having a conversation and we were just chatting about something, and maybe it was still when you were marching drum corps, I'm not sure. But you had said it wasn't until I started to getting good that I realized how bad I was. And you're talking about music performance. And you said it, and I just kind of thought about, do you remember that conversation at all?
Oh, so vividly. And I remember the moment. I remember the best I ever sounded on trumpet. It was in eighth grade. And my grandparents, who lived in New Mexico, they have a Victorian house. So brick walls, high ceilings, every room is really live in the house. I was in my grandparents' dining room playing through the Green Standard of Excellence book. And I was just like, oh my God, no one has ever sounded this good on trumpet. Um, Dear listeners, many people sound far better than that on trumpet, but you don't know what you don't know. And, that kind of goes back to my advice to the program coordinators. You know, the unknown unknowns are what kill you. To paraphrase Jurassic Park, it's never the velociraptor that you're paying attention to that catches you. It's always the one that you're not expecting. The unknown unknown is the one that gets you. And so it's like, the less you know about your own given domain, the easier it is to be like, I'm king of the mountain. When it's like, well, you actually don't know how tall mountains can get and how deep canyons can get. And I feel like it's as your scope broadens, humility and context come with it naturally. You become aware that it's like, oh, this mountain was tough to climb, but it's nothing compared to Everest or K2 or something like that.
Yeah. So I like both of those phrases that you've said. The amount that I learned from you is great. Dan, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or as we've kept going through stuff, was there stuff that's eating at you to talk about?
No, if anything, I just feel like there's just like the more that we speak, Ryan, I feel like there's just even more topics waiting to emerge for future podcast episodes. So keep your calendar open. We're going to reach back out to you.
Oh, absolutely. We've talked a lot about the generalities of what it means to be a program coordinator, but the job changes and the exigencies of each season, like the individual events that pop up and require you to change plans and pivot, as we've said multiple times in this podcast. Every season there are different ones and they all come at their own timeline. So perhaps as we get into fall and we all start experiencing those unpredictable roller coaster moments, we can talk through how we cope with these things and how we continue to always find the moments of best advantage in the journey towards championships.
In our last podcast, you had several shout outs that you gave. Were there any new ones or anything else you'd like to add onto those?
This is one based off of the conversations that Dan and I had when we were together working at that school this weekend. We were reflecting on not just the excellence of the kids, but it was a weekend long camp. And so the parents did the dinner break. It was family favorites. So we got to walk down the line, talk to each of the individual families, and you become aware that it's like every program. I think I might have said something similar to this on the last call about a Golden Show marching band show, but there are these concentric layers of enjoyment around it. It's like the show wasn't just cool, it also did well. And that wasn't just the case. I liked the kids and rehearsal was fun. And then the shout out is about this other concentric layer, which is to the parents, the families that raise the kind of kids that become great students, the parents that show up and cook the food, build the props, read the bus lists, talk to the irritating parking lot people at the BOA regional. It's like that outer armor of parental love that allows everything that we do to exist is just so unbelievably crucial. And I think it goes underpraised when we talk about excellent programs. Every national level program that I've gotten to lucky enough to be around has had national level parents and national level love and care and involvement from the parents that just sort of like the ozone layer, it shields everything in the band director ecosystem from the harsh realities of the real world. It's key.
That's a great shout out. And there are so many programs that have great booster support. I know that I saw a lot of that when we were hosting our competition, and you have this next band comes in, and you just see the parents that they will do anything for those students, and they're on it, and the props that they build, and it's so impressive. So that support system for the band is crucial. It really is. Dan and Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. I always enjoy our time talking, and I look forward to our next opportunity to chat and shoot a podcast. And we want to hear from our listeners. We have a future podcast coming up where we're going to be discussing student leadership. And if you have a specific question that you would like us to bring up during that podcast, please email us at podcast@azmba.org. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.